She placed the white envelope on the mahogany desk. Standard, polite, typed in 12-point Arial. 2 weeks' notice. Adrian didn't look at the paper. His gaze dropped to her waist, then to the half-eaten sleeve of saltines peeking out of her canvas tote. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't raise his voice. He simply picked up his pen, drew a single, heavy line through her signature, and uttered the 7 words that officially revoked her freedom. The problem with working for a criminal enterprise wasn't the violence, it was the paperwork. Nora Bennett stood over the industrial Chaosera on the 14th floor of the Drexel building, watching page 42 of a Shell Company tax return slide into the tray. The machine smelled of hot ozone and cheap pink toner. Outside the tinted floor-to-ceiling windows, rain was turning the Philadelphia skyline the color of wet cement. She was 28 years old. Her lower back ached with a dull, rhythmic throb, and her left shoe was pinching her heel. Most people imagined organized crime as dark rooms, cigar smoke, and men in tailored suits shouting in broken Italian. Nora knew the truth. Organized crime was an Excel spreadsheet with 46 tabs. It was disputing a $600 charge for commercial tire rotation in New Jersey. It was making sure the holding company in Delaware filed its quarterly franchise tax by 5 p.m. so the federal auditors didn't get curious about where the freight revenue was actually going. The Chaosera gave a sharp, cheerful beep. Job complete. Nora gathered the warm paper, tapped the stack against her forearm to square the edges, and walked toward the restroom. She didn't walk fast. For the last 11 days, walking fast made the back of her throat taste like copper and old pennies. The 14th floor ladies' room was a relic of the late 90s. Speckled grey granite, flickering fluorescent tubes, and a radiator that clanked like a dying engine whenever the boiler downstairs kicked in. Nora locked the door of the handicap stall, set the tax returns on the stainless steel sanitary dispenser, and reached into her tote bag. Her fingers found the small, crinkled white pharmacy bag. She didn't pray. Cynics don't pray. They calculate probabilities. The probability that the generic brand from the corner drugstore had thrown a false positive at 6:15 this morning was roughly 0.4%. The probability that the second, more expensive digital test sitting in her purse right now would tell her something different was practically 0. Still, she sat. She waited the 3 minutes. She stared at the scratched beige paint on the back of the metal stall door, reading a faded Sharpie inscription from 2011 that said, "Dave is a cheating pig." When the tiny digital screen blinked the word yes, Nora didn't cry. She closed her eyes, let out a breath that smelled faintly of the peppermint Tums she'd been chewing since dawn, and did the math. Her savings account sat at $14,200. Her lease on the one-bedroom in Manayunk was up in November. A standard hospital berth in Pennsylvania, assuming no NICU stay and a mid-tier bronze ACA plan, ran roughly $6,800 out of pocket. Daycare for an infant in the metro area averaged $1,400 a month, and the father was a man whose second cousin had been fished out of the Schuylkill River 3 summers ago with a parking meter chained to his ankles. 3 months ago. Her brain reminded her, unhelpful and sharp. The blizzard in Chicago. It hadn't been a sweeping cinematic romance. It had been 16 hours trapped in a regional Hilton because O'Hare shut down its runways. It had been 2 bottles of overpriced room service scotch, a blown logistics deal that cost the firm $400,000, and the sheer exhausting adrenaline of 2 people who spent their entire lives keeping their guard up, suddenly deciding to drop it for 70 minutes in the dark. The next morning, Adrian had put on his watch, handed her his dry cleaning receipt, and asked her to get the head of the local Teamsters on the line. They hadn't spoken of it since. In the ecosystem of Falco Logistics, personal lapses were treated like clerical errors. You corrected the spreadsheet, resaved the file, and moved on. Except this particular spreadsheet had compiled an unerasable macro. Nora wrapped the plastic stick in 3 layers of rough brown paper towel, dropped it into the stainless steel bin, and flushed. She stood at the sink for 2 minutes, running cold water over the insides of her wrists until her pulse stopped doing that frantic, bird-like flutter against her skin. She checked her reflection. Her skin looked pale, slightly yellow under the fluorescent tubes. Her brown hair was pulled back in a claw clip that was missing 1 tooth. She looked like a woman who made $54,000 a year to keep a dangerous man's schedule tidy. She reached into her tote, pulled out a clean manila envelope, and slipped a single sheet of a heavy stock paper inside it. She walked down the long, carpeted hall to the corner office. The door was open. Adrian Falco was sitting behind a custom slab of reclaimed walnut, his phone cradled between his left shoulder and his ear. He wasn't wearing a suit jacket. His white dress shirt was rolled to the elbows, exposing thick, dark hair on his forearms and the faint, silvery track of an old surgical scar near his wrist. He was 36, looked 40 on bad days, and possessed the posture of a man who assumed every chair he sat in belonged to him by divine right. "I don't care about the way station, Jimmy," Adrian said into the receiver. His voice was low, gravelly, stripped of any regional accent, the voice of an educated man who chose to work in the dirt. "Pay the fine. Put it on the fuel card. If the driver gives you static, tell him his brother's body shop leases its garage from my uncle. He'll figure out the math. Yeah, call me at 4. He dropped the phone onto the desk. It hit the wood with a dull thud. He didn't look up immediately. His eyes remained fixed on a yellow legal pad covered in tight, left-handed scrawls. "The Delaware filing go through?" he asked. "Time-stamped 1:42 p.m., Nora said. She stepped across the threshold. The plush carpet swallowed the sound of her cheap rubber soles. "Confirmation number is in your inbox. I printed the hard copy for the safe." "Good." He reached for his coffee mug, realized it was empty, and set it back down with a tiny, irritated click of his tongue. "Get Jimmy on the calendar for Thursday. He's skimming the diesel receipts again. I need to look at his eyes when he tells me the truck burned 80 gallons between Trenton and Newark." Nora didn't reach for her tablet. She didn't pull up the scheduling software. She walked to the edge of the walnut slab and set the manila envelope down, dead center, right over his yellow legal pad. Adrian's pen stopped moving. The nib hovered a millimeter above the paper. He didn't lift his head for 3 seconds. When he did, his dark, heavy-lidded eyes tracked up her arm, past her shoulder, resting squarely on her face. There was no warmth in him. There was rarely warmth in him. Adrian Falco looked at the world the way an insurance adjuster looks at a flooded basement, calculating the damage, checking the liability limits. "What is this?" he asked. "Standard notice," Nora said. Her voice held. That was her one point of pride. Her voice always held. 2 weeks. My last day on the payroll will be the 14th. The office went profoundly, dangerously quiet. The only sound was the distant, muffled shh of the traffic 40 yards below on Market Street, tires cutting through the standing rainwater. Adrian didn't open the envelope. He leaned back in his leather executive chair, the springs giving a microscopic groan under his weight. He laced his fingers over his stomach. He didn't look angry. He looked genuinely, intellectually puzzled, like a man who had just watched a vending machine reject a crisp, brand-new dollar bill. "Sit down, Nora," he said. "I have the Q3 manifests to reconcile before 5. I said sit down. It wasn't a shout. It was a drop in register. It was the tone he used when he told the guys from South Philly to put their hands on the hood of the car. Nora pulled out the upholstered guest chair and sat, keeping her knees together, her canvas tote resting firmly in her lap like a shield. Adrian reached out, picked up the envelope, and slid his thumb under the flap. The paper tore with a clean, dry rip. He unfolded the single sheet. His eyes scanned her carefully formatted paragraphs. The standard boilerplate thanking Falco Holdings for the opportunities for professional growth, the polite offer to train her replacement. He read it twice. Then he laid it flat on the desk. "Who approached you?" he asked. "No one. Don't insult my intelligence, Bennett. It's raining. I've got 400 tons of rebar sitting on a stalled barge in the Delaware River, and my head hurts. Who made the offer? Was it the Greeks? Did Castellano offer you a remote gig? Nobody offered me anything, Adrian. I'm leaving the industry." "The industry," he repeated, the corner of his mouth twitching upward in a dry, humorless smirk. "You make it sound like banking. You manage the back end of a mid-Atlantic transit syndicate. You don't leave the industry to go sell real estate, Nora. You know the routing numbers for 6 different offshore accounts. You know my mother's home address. I signed the standard NDA," she said, her palms beginning to sweat against the rough canvas of her bag. "And the non-compete. I have no intention of breaking either. I'm moving out of state. I need a change of pace." Adrian leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. The casual, relaxed posture vanished. The air in the room seemed to condense, growing heavier, drawing toward him. "You haven't taken a sick day since February of last year," he said softly. Nora blinked. "What? You take 45 minutes for lunch. You eat at your desk 4 days out of 5. You buy your groceries at the Acme on Ridge Avenue on Tuesday nights because you hate the weekend crowds. Your rent is $1,900 a month. Your student loan payment is $340, and you put $800 a month into a high-yield savings account at PNC. A cold, greasy spike of dread drove itself into the base of Nora's skull. "You audit my personal accounts?" "I audit everything that touches my network," Adrian said. His tone was utterly devoid of malice. It was purely functional. "You're my primary filter, Nora. If you get into debt, you become a leverage point. If you get a boyfriend who plays online poker, you become a liability. So yes, I check the perimeter." He reached into his center desk drawer. He didn't pull out a file. He just rested his hand on the wood. 3 weeks ago," Adrian continued, his voice dropping another octave, becoming a quiet, rhythmic hum in the quiet room. "You stopped drinking the dark roast from the break room. You switched to ginger tea. Last Tuesday, you blocked out 2 hours on your shared calendar for a dental cleaning. But your dentist is Dr. Hallowell in Center City. His office is on 18th. Your phone's GPS pinged off a cell tower on 4th Street. Nora tried to swallow. Her throat was bone dry. "You track my phone?" "I pay for the phone, Nora. It's a corporate asset." He tilted his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with the terrifying, unblinking intensity of a hawk watching a field mouse try to hide behind a pebble. "There's no dentist on that block of 4th Street. There's a dry cleaner, a Vietnamese bakery, and the Women's Health Collaborative of Greater Philadelphia." The silence returned, but this time it had teeth. Nora felt the blood drain entirely from her face. Her grip on the canvas tote tightened until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to stand up. She wanted to tell him to go to hell, to throw her keys on his desk and walk out into the rain. But her legs felt like lead pipes. "You're overstepping," she whispered. Her voice finally betrayed her, cracking on the second syllable. "That is my medical privacy. You have no right—" "I have every right," Adrian interrupted. He stood up. He didn't tower over her to intimidate her. He simply walked around the massive walnut desk, his polished Oxfords making no sound on the wool rug. He stopped 3 feet away from her chair, leaning his hip against the edge of his desk, looking down at her with an expression that was suddenly, shockingly exhausted. "How many weeks?" he asked. "Adrian, stop. Nora, don't play poker with me. You don't have the face for it. How many weeks?" She stared at his white shirt buttons. She couldn't look at his eyes. If she looked at his eyes, the thin, fragile wall of clinical detachment she had built around herself since 6:15 this morning was going to shatter into 1,000 jagged pieces. 12, she said to his chest. Adrian let out a slow, measured breath through his nose. He looked up at the ceiling for a brief moment, his jaw muscle working, flexing hard once, twice. "The night in Chicago," he said. It wasn't a question. "The math works out." She muttered, her voice brittle. "Congratulations. You can do basic subtraction. Now, if you'll sign the bottom of the notice, I'll go clean out my desk." She reached out to take the paper back. Adrian's hand moved with a speed that defied his relaxed posture. His fingers caught her wrist, not hard enough to bruise, but firm enough to lock her in place. His skin was warm, dry, calloused at the base of the palm. "Look at me," he said. Nora forced her head up. Her eyes were burning with unshed, furious tears. "Let go of my arm, Adrian. You think you're going to walk out of this building?" he said, his voice dropping into a register that felt like cold iron against her spine. "You think you're going to pack up your little apartment in Manayunk, get a job at some anonymous logistics firm in Ohio, and raise my kid in a 2-bedroom townhouse near a strip mall? It's my child. It's a Falco," he corrected, his grip tightening just a fraction. "Do you have any idea what Jimmy Gallo's people would do if they found out you were carrying my blood out there in the open, entirely unprotected? Do you think the Russians check a birth certificate before they run a car off the road to send a message?" "Nobody knows!" she yelled, the panic finally breaking through the ice. "Nobody knows because we don't talk about it. I'm a nobody to them." "You're my secretary," Adrian said quietly. "You've sat in on 40 meetings. You're the gatekeeper. And now—" He looked down at her stomach, his gaze lingering there for a long, heavy second before returning to her eyes. "You're carrying the only piece of leverage on this earth that could actually make me hesitate." He let go of her wrist. He reached behind him, picked up his black Mont Blanc fountain pen from the desk, and unscrewed the cap. He didn't look at her resignation letter as he pulled it toward him. He simply drew a single, thick, black line diagonally through her signature at the bottom of the page. "Like it or not, you're staying," Adrian said. He capped the pen with a sharp, definitive snap. "That baby is mine. I will call the police," Nora said. She was standing now. Her chair had scraped back against the carpet. Her chest was heaving, the adrenaline turning the peppermint taste in her mouth bitter and sour. "I will walk down to the lobby, I will find the beat cop on Market Street, and I will tell him you are holding me against my will." Adrian didn't even blink. He tossed the ruined resignation letter into the wire wastebasket beneath his desk. "The beat cop on Market Street is Sergeant Miller," Adrian said, checking his wristwatch. "His daughter plays travel softball. My company sponsors her team's charter buses. You tell Miller I'm keeping you here, he'll offer to carry your bags down to the car." "You can't own people, Adrian. This is the 21st century. "I don't own people, Nora. I manage risk." He picked up his suit jacket from the back of his chair and shrugged into it, the dark charcoal wool settling over his broad shoulders like armor. "Right now, you are a walking, talking catastrophic risk to my organization. You're emotional, you're exhausted, and your plan for the next 6 months consists of running away with 14 grand in the bank and hoping nobody notices your belly getting big." He picked up his phone and pressed a single speed dial button. "Sal," Adrian said into the speaker, "bring the Suburban to the loading dock. Bring Frankie. We're taking Nora home." "My apartment," Nora started. "We aren't going to Manayunk," Adrian said, cutting the call. He looked at her, his expression softening just enough to show the terrifying, absolute certainty underneath. "Your lease is being terminated today. Sal's sister runs a packing crew. They're at your place right now putting your winter clothes in boxes." "You broke into my apartment?" "I sent a professional bonded moving team to secure your personal effects," he corrected calmly. "They have boxes for the kitchen stuff. Don't worry about the sofa. It was cheap IKEA crap anyway. I'll have it donated." Nora stood, frozen. The sheer, terrifying momentum of his world was sweeping over her like a tidal wave. For 3 years, she had watched Adrian Falco rearrange the lives of trucking contractors, city councilmen, and union stewards with a few casual phone calls. She had admired the efficiency of it. She had formatted the memos. She had never imagined what it felt like to be the spreadsheet being optimized. "I won't go," she whispered. Her knees were shaking so hard she had to lean her hip against the back of the guest chair to stay upright. "I will scream in the elevator. I'll make a scene in the lobby." Adrian stopped halfway to the door. He turned back. He walked up to her, invading her personal space until she could smell the clean, dry cedar scent of his cologne mixed with the rain on his jacket. He didn't touch her. He just looked down into her pale, terrified face. "If you scream in the elevator," Adrian said, his voice barely louder than a breath, "Sal will carry you out over his shoulder, and every single employee on this floor will assume you had a nervous breakdown. If you fight me in the street, I will have Dr. Abrams sign a medical directive stating that your pregnancy is high risk and requires immediate, monitored bed rest. I have 3 different judges in this county who will sign an emergency conservatorship before your tea gets cold." He leaned down an inch, his eyes dark, vast, entirely unyielding. "I am not trying to hurt you, Nora, but you need to understand something right now. The moment that line turned blue this morning, your life as an independent operator ended. You belong inside my perimeter now. You fight me. You waste energy you need for the kid. So pick up your bag." She stared at him. She hated him in that moment, with a purity that felt almost holy. She hated his expensive suit. She hated his calm, logical voice. And most of all, she hated the tiny, traitorous part of her own exhausted brain that realized he was right about the Russians. Slowly, her fingers uncurled from the back of the chair. She reached down and picked up her canvas tote. "I hate you," she said. It wasn't dramatic. It was flat, cold, stated for the record. "I know," Adrian said. He gestured toward the open door. "After you." The ride down in the freight elevator was silent. Sal, a 6'4" wall of Hawaiian shirts and blunt trauma, stood in the corner, nodding politely to Nora as she stepped in. He didn't look at her stomach. He didn't look at Adrian. He just stared at the floor indicator lights like a well-trained mastiff. The Suburban was waiting in the rain-slicked concrete loading dock behind the building. The engine was running, sending plumes of white exhaust into the damp, chilly air. Adrian opened the rear passenger door himself. Nora climbed in. The leather seats were heated. There was a bottle of Voss water and a fresh, unopened sleeve of saltine crackers sitting in the center console cup holder. She looked at the crackers, then looked out the tinted window as Adrian slid into the seat beside her, bringing the smell of the wet city inside with him. The heavy door shut with a solid, hermetic thud, cutting off the sound of the rain entirely. "Drive, Sal," Adrian said. The big SUV pulled out of the dark dock and merged into the grey, sludgy flow of Philadelphia afternoon traffic. Nora watched a woman in a yellow raincoat hurrying across the intersection, struggling to keep a cheap umbrella inside out against the wind. A normal woman. A woman going home to a normal kitchen to eat a normal dinner. Nora closed her eyes, rested her forehead against the cool glass of the window, and felt the first, tiny, undeniable flutter of nausea rise in her chest. The main line did not look like a place where men got put into the trunks of Lincoln Town cars. It looked like old money, wet asphalt, and 200-year-old oak trees dripping rain onto manicured boxwood hedges. The Suburban turned off Montgomery Avenue in Gladwin, tires crunching over a quarter-mile of crushed grey gravel before stopping in front of a sprawling, 3-story stone colonial. There were no iron bars on the windows. There were no men standing on the porch with tactical rifles. There was only a wreath of dried eucalyptus on the front door and 3 discreet, matte black domes tucked into the copper rain gutters. Thermal imaging cameras wired directly to a server rack in the basement. Sal put the vehicle in park. The engine ticked as it cooled. "We're here," Adrian said. He didn't wait for Sal to open the door. He stepped out into the drizzle, walked around the rear bumper, and held his hand out to Nora. She didn't take it. She swung her legs out, her pinched heel slipping slightly on the wet stainless steel running board. She caught the door frame to steady herself. Adrian's hand hovered an inch from her elbow, rigid and ready to catch her, but he didn't force the contact. He let her find her own balance. Inside, the house smelled of beeswax polish, steam heat, and very old wool rugs. A woman in a pressed grey cardigan came out of the hallway. She looked 60, had the hard, practical forearms of someone who had spent 40 years kneading dough, and wore a silver crucifix pinned to her collar. "Mrs. Trent," Adrian said, unbuttoning his damp overcoat. "Take Nora's coat. Tell Frankie to bring the boxes from the garage up to the East Guest Suite. The East Suite gets the morning sun," Mrs. Trent said. Her voice was a flat, dry, Western Pennsylvania drawl. She didn't offer Nora a warm, maternal smile. She looked at Nora's waist, gave a single curt nod of professional assessment, and took the canvas tote from her stiff fingers. "I put clean linens on the king bed. There's chicken soup on the stove. Real stock, not the canned garbage full of sodium." "I'm not hungry," Nora said. "You'll eat a bowl anyway," Mrs. Trent replied, calmly, turning toward the kitchen. "The doctor said 80 grams of protein a day. You look like you've been surviving on tap water and spite." Nora stood in the center of the grand foyer. Above her, a brass chandelier hung from a 2-story ceiling. To her left was a formal living room with furniture that looked like it had never been sat on. To her right was a mahogany-paneled library. It was a beautiful house. It felt like a very expensive, very quiet tomb. "I need my work laptop," Nora said, turning to Adrian. He was hanging his coat in the hall closet. "Your corporate access has been rerouted. You can use the terminal in the library." "Rerouted? You aren't on the general VPN anymore, Nora." He closed the closet door. His white shirt was rumpled at the waist where he'd been sitting. "You don't handle the field manifests or the dispatch logs starting today. You're strictly internal auditing. Tax prep, real estate holdings, legitimate payroll. You're taking my accounts away. I am removing you from any file that contains the names of active drivers or union stewards," he said. He walked past her, his shoulder brushing hers, heading toward the library. "If Jimmy Gallo's people manage to clone your hard drive, I don't want them finding out which route the high-value electronics are taking out of the Camden yards next Tuesday. You're in the clean room now." She followed him into the library. On a massive pedestal desk sat her familiar Dell monitor, her ergonomic keyboard, and her favorite coffee mug, the chipped ceramic one she'd bought at a thrift store in college. Seeing that cheap $3 mug sitting on a desk worth more than her card did something terrible to her chest. It was the absolute proof of her capture. They hadn't just taken her, they had neatly, efficiently packed up her identity and set it down inside his perimeter. "I want to go to a real clinic," she said to his back. Her voice was shaking, but she locked her knees. "I want my own doctor, not some guy who sews up bullet wounds on your kitchen table." Adrian stopped by the sideboard. He poured 3 fingers of club soda into a glass, dropped a wedge of lime into it, and turned around. He handed it to her. "Dr. Abrams is a board-certified obstetrician," Adrian said quietly. He spent 12 years at Penn Medicine before his brother got into 50 grand of gambling debt with the Greeks. "I bought the paper. Abrams works private practice for my family now. His medical license is spotless, his equipment is state-of-the-art, and most importantly, his nurse doesn't gossip to her sister who dates a guy from South Philly. Take the glass. Don't take the glass." Her stomach gave a sharp, treacherous squeeze. The smell of the lime cut through the lingering scent of wet wool in her nose, instantly settling the acid in her throat. She took the glass. She took a long, cold sip. "This is kidnapping," she said. looking at the bubbles rising to the surface. "This is quarantine," Adrian corrected. He sat down in the leather armchair near the window, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Get some sleep, Nora. Tomorrow is October 1st. We have quarterly projections to run, and I don't like my accountants tired." By week 16, the waistbands of her pencil skirts stopped negotiating. Nora didn't ask for maternity clothes. She refused to give the house the satisfaction of outfitting her. Instead, she sat at the library desk in her oversized grey Manayunk sweatpants and a black Falco Logistics fleece she'd stolen from the supply closet 3 years ago, typing numbers into cell G14. Outside, November had arrived in a flurry of hard grey frost. The routine of the house was a clockwork machine. At 7 a.m., Mrs. Trent left a soft-boiled egg, 2 slices of dry rye toast, and a prenatal vitamin on the corner of the desk. At 1 p.m., Sal walked the perimeter with a German shepherd that didn't bark. At 6:30 p.m., Adrian came home. He didn't always come home clean. 4 days ago, he had walked through the front door at midnight, smelling sharply of industrial bleach and cheap diesel fuel. He hadn't come into the library. He had gone straight up the back stairs to the guest bathroom, run the shower for 40 minutes, and left his clothes in a tied plastic trash bag on the back porch for Sal to burn. Nora hadn't asked. "You didn't survive 11 years in public accounting by asking what the client did with the bleach. He's running small today," Dr. Abrams said. The doctor was 55, wore wire-rimmed glasses, and possessed the tired, gentle bedside manner of a man who had long ago traded his moral ambition for a quiet life. He had set up a portable General Electric ultrasound unit right on top of Adrian's mahogany desk, moving the Mont Blanc pen stand to make room for the gel bottle. Nora lay on the leather examination table they'd hauled in from the pool house. Her shirt was pulled up to her ribs. The cold gel made her shiver. Adrian stood at the head of the table. He wasn't wearing his jacket. His arms were crossed over his chest, his eyes glued to the small, flickering grey monitor. "Small?" Adrian's voice was sharp. Instantly, the posture of the room shifted. Sal, standing by the door, shifted his weight. "Within normal limits, Mr. Falco," Dr. Abrams said smoothly, tapping a keyboard command to freeze the frame. 45th percentile for gestational age. Heart rate is 152 beats per minute. Strong, regular rhythm. The placenta is high and posterior, which is ideal. On the screen, a tiny white, alien-like profile was curled into a tight C-shape. A small white dot pulsed rapidly in the center of its chest. Thwack, 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 thwack! It sounded like a tiny, distant helicopter. Nora stared at the ceiling plaster. She didn't want to look at the screen. If she looked at the screen, it became a person. If it became a person, the terrifying, suffocating reality of where this child was going to grow up would crush her chest until she couldn't breathe. "Show me the spine," Adrian said. "Right here," Abrams pointed with a stylus. All vertebrae intact. No markers for neural tube defects. Adrian leaned down. His face was inches from the monitor. For the first time since Nora had known him, the hard, calculated lines around his mouth softened. His jaw unclenched. His dark eyes tracked the tiny, translucent curve of the baby's skull, lingering on the microscopic flutter of its chest. Slowly. Without looking at Nora, his right hand left his chest. His fingers reached out, resting lightly on the bare, cool skin of her upper stomach, just above the line of the gel. His hand was heavy. It was warm. "He's moving," Adrian whispered. "She," Dr. Abrams corrected mildly. The room went dead silent. Even the radiator stopped clanking. Adrian didn't move his hand. He turned his head slowly, looking at the doctor with an expression that was entirely unreadable. "She? I ran the cell-free DNA blood draw last week," Abrams said, packing his stylus back into the velvet tray. "Accuracy is 99%. You're having a daughter, Adrian." Adrian looked back down at the screen. Then his gaze traveled down, resting on Nora's pale, rigid face. He didn't say a girl. He didn't say congratulations. His fingers tightened against her skin, just enough for her to feel the rough calluses on his palm. The hands of a man who had built a freight empire out of blood and diesel bills. "Double the perimeter guard," Adrian said to Sal without turning around. "Tell Frankie I want the lower gate reinforced with steel bollards by Friday. Nobody gets within half a mile of this property without their license plates run through the state database." "Adrian!" Nora started, her voice cracking. "Quiet," he said softly, looking down into her eyes. There was no cruelty in his voice, only a heavy, absolute finality. A boy can fight his way out of this business if he has to. A girl becomes a target the day she takes her first breath. She stays behind the stone, Nora. And so do you. By January, the snow was 3 feet deep along the driveway, turning the Gladwin estate into a white, silent fortress. Adrian had been gone for 4 days. The Castellano faction in North Jersey had disputed a container shipment of imported olive oil at the port of Newark, a shipment that contained $12 million worth of untaxed European pharmaceuticals, false-bottomed inside the tins. It required a sit-down. Sit-downs required Adrian to be in a windowless room behind a bakery in Hoboken with 3 lawyers and 2 men who carried snub-nosed revolvers in their ankle holsters. Nora sat in the library, the glow of the desk lamp cutting through the early 4 p.m. winter twilight. She was 21 weeks along. The baby, the girl, her mind whispered late at night when the house was dark, was kicking against her lower ribs with the rhythmic, stubborn thump of a tiny fist hitting a door. The house phone on the corner of the desk buzzed. The internal intercom line. Nora pressed the speaker button. "Yes?" "Miss Bennett!" Frankie's voice came through. He was down at the gatehouse, a quarter-mile away at the edge of Montgomery Avenue. He sounded tense, his breath clipping the microphone. "We got a delivery." "Nothing is scheduled today," Nora said, pulling up the master logistics calendar. "The grocery delivery isn't until Thursday morning." "It ain't groceries," Frankie said. "It's a private courier. Kid in a Honda Civic. Said he was paid $50 cash by a guy at a diner in Conshohocken to drop a package at our gate. Addressed to you. Personal." Nora's hand froze over her keyboard. "Did you scan it?" Sal ran the wand over it. "No metal, no chemical signatures. It's a cardboard box from that high-end department store in King of Prussia. Nordstrom." "Bring it up to the porch," Nora said. Her dry throat clicked. "Don't bring it inside." 5 minutes later, she stood at the glass French doors of the library, looking out onto the snow-covered stone patio. Sal stood in the freezing wind, wearing heavy black leather gloves. On the glass patio table sat a pristine, silver-wrapped gift box, tied with a thick white satin bow. Sal looked through the glass at her, gave a curt nod, and pulled his pocketknife. He slit the silver paper down the side. He lifted the lid. Inside was a layer of pale pink tissue paper. Sal peeled it back carefully, reaching inside. He pulled out a baby garment, a tiny newborn-sized knitted sweater, spun from expensive, ridiculously soft white cashmere. Nora felt the breath leave her lungs in a white, ragged cloud against the warm glass of the door. It was beautiful. It was innocent. Then Sal reached deeper into the box. He pulled out a piece of standard, white 8.5 by 11 printer paper. He didn't read it. He turned it around and held it flat against the glass patio door so Nora could see it from inside the warm library. It was a photocopy of her old electric bill from the Manor Yunk apartment, dated August of last year. Her name, Nora Bennett, was highlighted in bright, neon yellow ink. Attached to the bottom of the bill with a silver paperclip was a high-resolution photograph. It had been taken from across the street on Ridge Avenue, zoomed in through the glass window of the Acme grocery store. It showed Nora standing by the produce section, holding a bag of Honeycrisp apples, her left hand resting instinctively. protectively over the small, early swell of her stomach. Written across the bottom of the photograph, in neat black block letters, were 5 words. "Pretty girl, keep her warm." Nora's knees gave out. She didn't fall to the floor. She caught the heavy brass handle of the French door, her knuckles turning white, her forehead resting against the freezing, cold pane of glass. The baby gave a sharp, violent kick against her ribs, as if reacting to the sudden, chemical spike of pure terror dumping into her mother's bloodstream. The library door behind her banged open. Nora didn't turn around. She smelled the freezing New Jersey air, the stale cigar smoke, and the heavy, unmistakable scent of copper before she heard his boots on the hardwood. Adrian didn't take off his coat. He walked straight past her, threw the locking bolt on the French doors, and shoved them open into the winter wind. He snatched the paper from Sal's gloved hand. He stared at the photograph for 3 seconds. His face didn't turn red. He didn't shout. Instead, all the color drained out of his skin until his jawline looked like carved Italian marble. His dark eyes went entirely flat, stripped of any human warmth, leaving only the ancient, terrifying calculus of a man who had just watched someone step across his border. "Where is the courier?" Adrian asked Sal. His voice was quiet, almost conversational over the howling wind. "Frankie held him at the gatehouse," Sal said. "Kid's 17. Scared out of his mind. Says a guy in a gray Ford pickup gave him the $50. Get the license plate off the diner's security footage." Adrian said. He folded the photocopy neatly in half, then in quarters, slipping it into the breast pocket of his expensive wool coat. "Tell Jimmy Gallo to pull every driver off the Jersey Turnpike tonight. Nobody moves freight until I find the owner of that truck." He stepped back inside, pulling the heavy glass doors shut against the snow. He turned to Nora. She was trembling so violently her teeth were making a tiny, clicking sound against each other. She couldn't look at his eyes. She looked at the pink tissue paper still visible through the glass on the patio table. Adrian reached out. He didn't grab her wrist this time. He put both hands on her shoulders, his heavy, wool-covered weight grounding her, forcing her to stand upright. "Look at me," he commanded softly. She looked up. Her eyes were wide, wet, filled with a cynical accountant's ultimate, terrifying realization. The spreadsheet had failed. There was no formula to calculate this away. "They know," she whispered. "Adrian, they saw me. They saw a ghost," Adrian said. His voice was steady, vibrating through his coat into her collarbones. "That apartment is gone. That grocery store is 40 miles away. You are inside my house. They sent a sweater for my baby!" She screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat, raw and jagged. "They know it's a girl! They know!" Adrian pulled her against his chest. It wasn't a gentle, romantic embrace. It was a cage of bone and heavy wool, locking her against his heartbeat so she couldn't pull away. He pressed his face into the side of her neck, his rough morning stubble scraping her skin. "Let them look," Adrian said into her hair, his voice dropping into a register that sounded like a promise made over a dark, open grave. "By tomorrow night, the man who took that picture won't have eyes to see her with. You didn't track a turf war by counting bodies on the evening news. You tracked it through the operating expenses." By mid-February, Nora sat at the library desk with her swollen feet propped on a leather ottoman, staring at tab 12 of the master ledger. Fleet maintenance and legal retainers. In the last 14 days, Falco Logistics had spent $82,000 on emergency tow trucks in northern New Jersey. They had spent $140,000 on bail bondsmen in Essex County. 3 refrigerated Peterbilt tractor-trailers had been written off as total losses due to electrical fires, while parked in secured lots. The Castellano family wasn't shooting at Adrian in the street. They were doing something much more dangerous to a man with fixed overhead. They were bleeding his cash flow. The baby kicked hard against Nora's ribs, a sharp, rolling pressure that made her catch her breath and drop her hands to her lap. 32 weeks. Her skin felt stretched thin, tight as a drum across her stomach. She couldn't see her own kneecaps anymore. The heavy oak door of the library swung open. Adrian walked in. He wore a dark wool suit, but the tie was gone, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. There was a faint, yellowish-purple bruise fading along the line of his left cheekbone, the kind of mark left by a steering wheel or a blunt elbow. He didn't go to the bar. He walked straight to her desk, carrying a brown, grease-spotted paper bag. He set it down beside her keyboard. "What is that?" Nora asked. Her voice was raspy from the dry winter heat of the radiators. "Pretzels," Adrian said, collapsing into the leather armchair opposite her desk. He rubbed the bridge of his nose with his thumb and forefinger, his eyes squeezed shut. From the place on Reading Terminal, the ones with the coarse salt. Nora stared at the bag. She hadn't mentioned pretzels to him. She hadn't mentioned them to anyone. She had simply spent 20 minutes looking at a food blog on her monitor at 2 o'clock in the morning when the heartburn wouldn't let her sleep. "Your router flags my browser history," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I have an automated script," Adrian murmured, his eyes still closed. "It flags any search query originating from this IP address containing the words pain, hospital, police, train schedules, or food. You looked up soft pretzels 4 times yesterday." "Eat." She reached into the bag. The pretzel was still warm, wrapped in foil. She broke off a corner. The salt hit her tongue, sharp and satisfying, grounding her against the surreal absurdity of her life. "We're down 400 grand this month," Nora said, chewing. She pointed a pen at the monitor. "If the Camden dock workers go on strike next week like Jimmy Gallo says they will, you won't make the quarterly payment on the commercial real estate debt in Delaware." Adrian opened one eye. "You're worrying about my debt coverage ratio while eating a pretzel I brought you. I'm an accountant, Adrian. Bad math offends me." She swallowed, her tone dropping, losing its defensive edge. "The Castellano crew burned another truck in Newark last night. Frankie said the driver ended up in the ICU with 3rd-degree burns." Adrian's face went still. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by that familiar, terrifying stillness. He sat up, resting his elbows on his knees, looking at her swollen stomach before meeting her eyes. "The driver's name is Pete," Adrian said quietly. "He has 2 kids. His wife's mortgage is being paid out of my personal account by noon tomorrow, and the man who threw the road flare into Pete's cab is currently sitting in a basement in South Philly trying to remember his own middle name." "Is this going to end?" she asked. "It ends when Castellano accepts that the New Jersey Turnpike belongs to my family," Adrian said. He stood up, stepping around the desk until he was standing beside her chair. "Or it ends when his nephews decide he's too old to run the business and retire him to Florida." He reached down. His large hand rested on the high curve of her stomach. The baby, as if recognizing the deep, baritone vibration of his voice in the room, rolled directly into his palm. Adrian's breath hitched. It was a tiny, microscopic break in his armor, visible only to a woman who spent her life studying his data points. "She's getting strong," he whispered. "She runs out of room," Nora said, looking down at his hand. His skin was pale, calloused, the knuckles slightly swollen from whatever had happened in New Jersey 48 hours ago. "Adrian, what happens when she gets here? Truly, do I get my own room? Do I get a car? Or am I just the wet nurse living in your East Wing until she goes to boarding school?" Adrian didn't pull his hand away. He leaned down until his face was level with hers. His dark eyes were bloodshot at the corners, tired, but utterly absolute. "You think I kept you here for 9 months just to turn you into an employee?" he asked softly. "You're the mother of my heir, Nora. You don't get a car because you don't drive alone anymore. You don't get your own apartment because my daughter doesn't sleep in a building I don't own. That's a prison. That's safety. He corrected, his thumb stroking the rough cotton of her fleece once, gently. The world out there doesn't care about your master's degree, Nora. It cares whose name is on the birth certificate. You stay with me. You run the books. You raise the kid. And in return, nobody on this earth ever gets to make you feel small again. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket over his bruised ribs. Get some sleep, he said. Abrams is coming by at 9 tomorrow to check your blood pressure. Don't argue with him about the sodium. The spring rains arrived on April 4th, heavy and cold, turning the Gladwin estate into a swamp of mud and budding oak leaves. Nora was 38 weeks along. She didn't walk anymore. She waddled, her lower back locked in a permanent, agonizing spasm. She sat in the library at 9 o'clock at night, trying to reconcile the March bank statements, when the desk lamp flickered, buzzed, and died. The computer monitor went black. Down the hall, the grandfather clock kept ticking. 10 seconds later, the deep, low thrum, thrum, thrum of the industrial diesel generator in the basement kicked in. The emergency backup lights, dim yellow LED strips recessed along the baseboards, illuminated the hallway. The library door opened immediately. It wasn't Adrian. It was Sal. He wasn't wearing his usual Hawaiian shirt. He wore a black tactical vest over a dark sweatshirt, and in his right hand, pointing safely toward the floorboards, was a suppressed Heckler & Koch submachine gun. "Miss Bennett?" Sal said. His voice was entirely conversational, which made it 10 times more terrifying. "Away from the windows, please. Come into the interior hall." "What happened to the power?" Nora asked, pushing herself up from the chair. Her knees popped. "Somebody dropped a utility pole on Montgomery Avenue." Sal said, stepping forward to take her elbow with his free hand. He guided her firmly out of the library, away from the glass patio doors. "Probably an accident, wet roads, but Mr. Falco's protocols say we lock the box when the grid goes down." They moved into the windowless center foyer. Frankie was already there, standing near the heavy oak front door, checking the battery feed on a thermal monitor. "Perimeter cameras 2 and 4 are blind," Frankie muttered, without looking up. "Somebody sprayed paint over the lenses down by the lower gate." "Castellano?" Nora whispered, her hand going instinctively to her stomach. "Castellano's people don't have the stomach for a house hit," Sal said smoothly, setting a heavy wooden chair in the middle of the hallway for her. "Sit down, Miss Bennett. It's just young guys testing the fence, seeing how fast our response times are." Thump. The sound was distant, muffled by the stone walls, but clear. It came from the direction of the long gravel driveway, the sound of a vehicle ramming the reinforced steel bollards Frankie had installed 6 months ago. Nora sat down hard on the wooden chair. Instantly, a warm, unmistakable rush of liquid soaked through the seat of her grey sweatpants, running down her bare ankles onto the hardwood floor. She froze. She looked down at the dark, spreading puddle between her shoes. "Sal?" she said. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It was small, thin, stripped of every ounce of corporate cynicism. Sal looked down. The big man's eyes widened just a fraction. For the first time in 9 months, the professional bodyguard looked genuinely, humanly panicked. "Frankie!" Sal barked, his voice bouncing off the high stone ceiling. "Call Abrams. Tell him the water broke." "I can't get a cell signal!" Frankie yelled from the door, frantically tapping his screen. "They got a jammer sitting out on the main road. Landlines are dead with the utility pole." Nora grabbed the armrests of the chair. A sudden violent cramp seized her lower abdomen. Not the dull ache of Braxton Hicks she'd been dealing with for weeks, but a vicious iron fist twisting her uterus in half. She let out a short, sharp gasp, her chin dropping to her chest. "Where is Adrian?" she managed to say through her teeth as the contraction peaked. "He's 20 minutes out," Sal said, pulling his radio off his tactical vest. The short-range walkie-talkies didn't rely on cell towers. "He's coming up the expressway. Frankie, get the pool house clinic prepped. Turn the sterile lights on the generator circuit. They're outside the gate, Sal! Frankie yelled, his hand on the deadbolt of the front door. I got 3 thermal signatures moving through the boxwood hedges on the east side. Then shoot them, Sal said simply. He looked down at Nora. He put his large, calloused hand over hers on the armrest. Miss Bennett, Nora, look at me. She forced her eyes up. The yellow baseboard lights cast harsh shadows under his jaw. We have 4,000 rounds of ammunition in the basement, Sal said quietly. We have 6 reinforced steel doors between this hallway and the lawn. Nobody is coming through that door. But you need to stand up right now, because we are walking to the pool house. Another contraction hit her, less than 3 minutes after the first. Her body wasn't negotiating. The sheer terror of the lockdown had dumped a massive surge of adrenaline into her system, throwing her labor into overdrive. I can't, she sobbed, tears finally breaking over her eyelashes. Sal, it hurts! I know, Sal said. He slung the submachine gun over his back by its tactical sling. He reached down, scooped her up into his massive arms like she was a child, and turned toward the back hallway. Frankie, hold the door. If anyone steps on the porch, take their knees out. The pool house clinic smelled of rubbing alcohol, fresh linen, and the sharp, metallic tang of ozone from the backup generator humming outside the window. Dr. Abrams had made it through the roadblock on Montgomery Avenue by driving his Mercedes sedan over a neighbor's manicured lawn and through a wooden split-rail fence. He had mud on his trousers and a small cut on his forehead where his head had hit the steering wheel, but his hands were entirely steady as he pulled on his sterile latex gloves. 10 centimeters, Abrams said, looking up from the foot of the delivery table. Fully effaced. Nora, you're doing beautifully. When the next peak comes, I need you to push into your heels. Nora lay on the elevated table, her hair soaked with sweat, sticking to her forehead in dark, wet ribbons. The room was brightly lit by the surgical lamp wired directly to the generator. Outside, over the hum of the engine, came the sharp, unmistakable crack, crack, crack of gunfire. 3 rounds, then silence. Nora screamed, not from the noise outside, but from the absolute, tearing agony of the child moving through her pelvis. She reached out blindly with her right hand, searching for the metal side rail. Her fingers were caught, not by Sal, not by the nurse Abrams had brought with him. The grip was large, warm, the rough calluses digging into her palm with absolute, immovable strength. Nora opened her eyes. Adrian was standing beside her pillow. He wore his heavy black overcoat over a torn white dress shirt. His right cheek was smeared with dark, wet mud. Or blood, she couldn't tell in the harsh light. His chest was heaving, his dark eyes wide, locked onto her face with a raw, desperate intensity she had never seen in any boardroom. I'm here, Adrian said. His voice was rough, ragged, stripped of all its smooth executive polish. Nora, I'm right here. They're shooting, she choked out, her fingers crushing his hand. It's over, Adrian said, leaning down to press his forehead against the side of her wet face. He smelled of rain, cordite, and cold air. Jimmy's crew came up the back fire road. Castellano's people are gone. The street is clear. Look at me. Don't listen to the outside. Look at me. I hate you, she sobbed as another contraction built, turning her vision grey at the edges. Adrian, I hate this life. I know, he whispered fiercely into her ear, his free hand coming up to cup her jaw, holding her head steady. I know you do. Push, Nora. Bring her here. Push. She closed her eyes, bore down into her heels, and gave the universe every remaining ounce of energy she had left in her body. The cynic died in that room. The accountant who calculated risk probabilities died in that room. There was only pure biological force, a woman tearing herself apart in the dark to bring a life into the light. A sudden sliding release, Then, cutting through the hum of the generator and the distant sound of police sirens down on Montgomery Avenue, came a sharp, furious, high-pitched cry. "Wah! Wah!" Time of birth. Dr. Abrams said smoothly, his voice dropping back into its comfortable, clinical rhythm as he clamped the cord. 11:42 p.m., a healthy, beautiful girl. Nora collapsed back against the wet pillow, her chest heaving, her whole body shaking violently from the sudden drop in adrenaline. She opened her eyes. Dr. Abrams had wrapped the baby in a warm, white flannel blanket. He didn't hand her to the nurse. He stepped around the table and placed the small, squalling bundle directly into Adrian's open arms. Adrian Falco, the man who liquidated trucking companies, who bought judges in Delaware, who ordered men run off the New Jersey Turnpike, froze. He held the tiny white bundle against his chest as if it were made of spun glass and high explosives. His large, dark head bowed over the baby. The infant's face was bright red, her tiny fists waving blindly in the air, a thick thatch of dark, wet Falcos plastered to her skull. Adrian slowly walked the 2 steps back to the head of the table. He sat down on the edge of Nora's mattress. He gently lowered the baby into the crook of Nora's arm, keeping his own hands wrapped securely around both of them. Nora looked down. The tiny dark eyes opened, heavy-lidded, dark, exactly like the man sitting beside her. The baby stopped crying the moment her cheek touched Nora's warm skin, letting out a tiny, shuddering, newborn sigh. Nora reached out a trembling finger. The baby's microscopic hand instantly opened, her tiny fingers clamping down around Nora's index finger with surprising, stubborn strength. "She has your grip," Nora whispered, a tear finally rolling down her cheek onto the flannel blanket. "She has your mouth," Adrian said quietly. He reached out, his thumb gently wiping the damp hair away from Nora's forehead. He didn't ask her to sign a contract. He didn't mention the Delaware tax filings or the security perimeter. He leaned down and pressed his lips firmly to the crown of her head, lingering there, his breath warm against her skin. "The Castellano War is over," Adrian said softly into the quiet room. "I bought their debts an hour ago. The main line is quiet." Nora looked up at him through her exhausted, tear-blurred vision. She looked at the blood on his collar, the dirt on his coat, and the absolute, terrifying devotion burning in his dark eyes as he watched their daughter breathe. She didn't ask for her 2 weeks' notice back. She didn't ask for her apartment in Manayunk. She simply adjusted the white blanket around the baby's shoulders, rested her head against Adrian's heavy wool arm, and closed her eyes inside the cage she had finally learned to call home. What an incredible, heart-stopping journey for Nora and Adrian. When 2 people from completely different worlds collide under such high-stakes, dangerous circumstances, the line between survival and unconditional love blurs in the most dramatic way possible. Did Adrian go too far to protect his family, or did Nora finally find the ultimate sanctuary inside his dangerous world? Let us know your thoughts on their intense dynamic in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deeply grounded, gritty romance audio story, please hit that like button, share this video with your fellow drama lovers, and subscribe to the channel for more immersive storytelling every single week.